Welcome to tonight's Commonwealth Club World Affairs program. My name is Scott Budman. I cover business and technology for NBC News here in town. And I'm your moderator for this evening's program with David Pogue. It is now my pleasure to introduce David Pogue. He is a journalist and CBS Sunday Morning correspondent. David was the New York Times weekly tech columnist from 2000 to 2013. He is a 5-time Emmy winner for his stories on CBS Sunday Morning, a New York Times best-selling author, a 5-time TED speaker, and host of 20 Nova Science specials on PBS. He has written or co-written more than 120 books, and he is here to talk about his newest book called Apple, The First 50 Years. It is my pleasure to bring out David Pogue.
Hey, man.
Hello.
Nicely done. Well, I'm afraid that's all the time we have.
Yes, well, we are really going to get into it, and this is a perfect crowd, a perfect place to talk about this. I've been covering Apple as you have, not as long, but I thought I knew a lot about Apple, and then I read your book. I did not know that volunteers wore oxygen packs when they were testing the Apple Watch, and that is just one fact. If any of you out there consider yourself Apple completists, you really need this book. Tell me how it started, because this is a company that has been legendary, and the story is perhaps even more legendary, so I imagine that's a lot of pressure to tell that story.
How the book started or how Apple started?
How the book started.
All right. Equally important.
Oh, yes.
It started with my wife, Nikki. 2 years ago, I hosted an event at the Computer History Museum in Mountain View dedicated to the Mac's 40th birthday. And they brought back all these old guys who had created the Mac when they were in their 20s. And they told stories of humor and emotion and PTSD. It was an unbelievable night. And the audience were all these, Silicon Valley people who love Apple. And it was like Woodstock. It was just, every joke was funny, every story wept. So then a few weeks later, Nikki woke me in the middle of the night and said, David, wake up. I just had a dream. And she's like, I have the best idea for a book. I was supposed to be working on a different book for Simon & Schuster, and she said, it's much better than your other idea. You should do a book about Apple's 50th anniversary. And I literally shut her down. I'm like, dude, that's come and gone. Go to sleep. And in the morning, though, I looked it up, and it was 2 years hence. It was now, which, 2 years is just enough time to write a 600-page book if you're crazy. And so that's how it started. Oh, and you know how when you're in your half sleep, you're not really sure if an idea is good or not? So I called my editor and told her, and she's like, oh yeah, dump that other book idea, do this. So that's how it started.
That's amazing. So let's talk about how Apple started. I'm from the Bay Area. The story is legendary here, but as you know, if you travel, it's legendary everywhere. The Jobs, Wozniak, sort of the Jagger, Richards. Would there be an Apple if just one of them tried to do this?
No way. So Woz, whom I know, is the same as he was in 1976. He's shy, he's childlike, he's funny, he lives for pranks, and his pranks are so epic. I understand they chopped us down to an hour from my originally planned 11 hours, but I would tell you some of these pranks, but they're incredible. And a mutual friend introduced him to another loner, 4 years younger, same high school, Homestead High School in Cupertino, named Steve Jobs. And the two of them spent an entire afternoon in front of the mutual friend's house talking about girls and Bob Dylan and electronics, and they became fast friends. This is long before, the personalities we now know were really settled in. And, Wozniak is incredible. He's a prodigy. Starting in middle school, he would go to the Stanford Linear Accelerator, SLAC. They had this incredible technical library, and he would get these magazines about mini computers and mainframes, and those postage advertiser cards in the back, postage paid, he would fill them out and get the literature from all these big, Honeywell and Bell Howell and all these things, and he would ask for literature on their mini computers, and then he would spend his evenings improving them on paper. He would study the layout and the chips, and he's like, oh, you could save 2 chips by doing it this way. And for years, he did this self-taught engineering genius long before he had the money to buy a single part. So finally, in 1971, he and this mutual friend built their first computer. It was a little tiny thing, a circuit board, just a circuit board. Remember, computers in the 70s, they didn't have screens. They didn't have keyboards. They were just glorified circuit boards and little switches on the front, toggle switches. That's how you input your question, and the answer would come to you with patterns of blinking lights. And nobody had computers but governments and corporations. So Wozniak's idea was always, imagine if you had that much power, or more to the point, if I had that much power for games, like in my house. So, I mean, we all have computers at home, but like at the time, like that was an absurd idea that you could own your own computer and use it whenever you wanted.
Right, the Homebrew Computer Club. Famously, you would have to get together with other nerds who had this idea that this board would be something. And at the time that they founded Apple, or were about to found Apple, I believe it was Hewlett-Packard, right, where Wozniak had a job.
Yeah, he worked in the calculator.
That he was very hesitant, understandably, to give up.
Yeah.
A young man who had aspirations. He eventually would marry, have family, all that stuff. And yet to be convinced to leave what even at the time, not to mention Hewlett-Packard now stands for the staid, stable, it's always going to be around company, to say, hey, let's take this flyer. And that has now been repeated hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times in Silicon Valley, but this is one of the first, right?
Yeah, Jobs was like, so after that little experiment, Woz made a bigger one that we now call the Apple One, just a circuit board, and Jobs was like, we should sell this.
Right.
And that's going to become a running theme tonight. So they sold this circuit board, and this is the part that's in all the movies. You know, they stuffed the chips in Jobs' garage, and are we next door to a movie theater? Oh, nice. Anyway, so they sold 150 of these Apple Ones, and then Wozniak had the idea for the Apple II, and that, as we know, changed everything. It became the first computer that most Americans had ever seen up close. Self-contained, attractive, one piece, ready to use when you took it out of the box. So, but yeah, as you say, Woz did not want to leave his job at HP. And so they were in a little bit of an argument, the two Steves. And finally, Jobs had a job at Atari, and he asked this older guy, this 41-year-old guy named Ron Wayne, can you sort of arbitrate this? And so he said, Woz, look, if the work that you're going to do for this thing we're calling Apple will belong to Apple. I mean, you can ask HP if you want for permission, but they won't own it. The new entity will own it. And finally, Woz agreed. This guy, Ron Wayne, put the paper in his typewriter, typed up a partnership agreement, April 1st, 1976. And they signed their names on it. And Jobs was so thrilled with the way he had arbitrated, he said, hey, Ron, I think you should be a co-founder, because what if we have disagreements in the future? We'll cut you in for 10%. 10% today, $350 billion.
This is the story also in the book that's legend that, you know, has us waking up in a cold sweat.
Yes, because you got to understand these two Steves were grungy and smelly and stringy, greasy hair. Jobs went barefoot. He had a weird diet. He didn't use deodorant. And he got a loan for $15,000 to build the Apple Ones. And Ron Wayne was a serial entrepreneur who had just been burned by another startup. And he's like, I'm on this piece of paper. I'm on the hook for $1,500 if these guys don't deliver. Nobody knew they would be Apple.
Of course.
So 11 days later, he walked into the Santa Clara registrar's office and took his name off the agreement. And last night, I met him for the first time.
Oh. Okay, I've got to ask.
Yeah, I asked him.
Yeah.
Do you have any regrets? And he said, you know, knowing what I knew then, it was the right call, because this was a really shaky operation run by these two really gristly guys, and I'd just been burned. And so that was the information I had then. That was the call I made, and I've never starved.
It's amazing.
We can all learn something from Ron Wayne.
Yeah. Because for every, I don't want to spend too much time on Ron Wayne, obviously, but for every person considering a startup and considering making that jump, there's the Job and Wozniak argument that I imagine takes up 99%. That's so sexy and exciting and we can change the world.
Yeah.
And then there's got to be that, but if I don't, am I making a horrible decision?
Yeah, that's right.
We regret the things we do or the things we don't.
Yeah.
So they do launch, and the Apple II was, I remember as a kid growing up here in the Bay Area, that was the first time I saw a computer, just like you said. Saw a lot more Macintoshes when those came out. But Apple fans for a long time were a very devoted crew. And again, it's quaint now to talk about, with everybody having an iPhone and a MacBook and all that, how small of a market they really were for this eventually super famous company.
I mean, it was so tiny. It was so weird to think of owning a computer. So they sold 6 million Apple IIs over 10 years. I mean, by today's standards, that's very little. But at the time, I mean, they were in all the schools. Kids learned to program on it. And they got a really lucky break. I mean, the design of this thing was insane. I mean, people who are engineers talk about Woz's circuitry in hushed tones. It was an incredible piece of work, done so elegantly with so few chips, and yet it had more power than the eventual rivals from Tandy and Commodore. And there were these two guys at MIT who wrote the first spreadsheet program. It was called VisiCalc. It was, if you looked at it today, you'd immediately recognize Microsoft Excel. Right. And it would only run on one available computer. It was the Apple II. So when VisiCalc came out, every small business in America rushed out to buy Apple IIs. The presence of VisiCalc on the Apple II 10-tupled its sales overnight. So all of a sudden, Apple was a giant force because of Woz's engineering and VisiCalc.
Now, eventually there were some stumbles. I know the Lisa was supposed to be a big seller. It was just very expensive. They got ambitious. I want to, though, get into the Mac because I think we could spend the next hour talking about the Macintosh. This was really what opened this up for the masses. This was the Beatles. This was, I mean, just something that everybody knew someone that had one of these, especially, growing up in the Bay Area. It was, and you mentioned education. I remember seeing Macs and the various iterations in their own little section in colleges, which is genius because if you grow up with one, you're going to want one later in life. How did that become the best new thing of its time?
Well, as you all know, the Mac was the computer that introduced the mouse and windows that overlapped and menus that dropped down, right? No! Read the book! No, just kidding. I'm not here to sell books. No, actually, you mentioned the Lisa briefly.
Right.
See if I can do this really fast. In 1979, in exchange for Apple was about to go public, and everybody wanted the shares. Apple was white hot. They had very few employees, but massive sales. So Xerox had an investment arm that said, please, 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 can we have some shares before you go public? Please, please, please. And Jobs said, okay, if you show me what you're working on at Xerox PARC, this Palo Alto Research Center, this think tank where they had developed the mouse and overlapping windows and drop-down menus and fonts, and Xerox said, sure. So famously in December 1979, Jobs and his team went over and saw these very primitive, like very unfinished concepts that we now take for granted there was no desktop. There were no icons. There was no trash. Nobody knew where the menus should go. Should they be at the top of the screen? Should they be in the windows? At Xerox, they were neither. They only appeared when you clicked one of the mouse's 3 buttons. And the buttons were different colors, red, blue, and yellow. And their functions changed depending on what you were pointing to. So if you're pointing to a scroll bar, it would be select. It was a disaster. Anyway, so Jobs is like, why aren't you marketing this? Why is this just a research project? Went home, ripped up their plans for the Lisa that they were working on. It was originally going to be one of those command line things, like amber text on a black screen. He's like, no, this is what it's going to be. So for 3 years, they took what they'd seen at Xerox PARC and polished it. I mean, they invented scroll bars and icons and the trash and how should the menu behave if the window's at the bottom of the screen, like, and the menu goes below the edge? How do you do that? What happens when the cursor goes to the bottom of the screen? Should it stop or should it wrap around again to the top? Like thousands of decisions. And I have to tell you my favorite story in this whole book. So Bill Atkinson just died, amazing guy. It was his job to recreate everything they'd seen at Xerox PARC and recreate it for the Lisa computer. And the one thing he couldn't get was the overlapping Windows business. Like today, if on your Windows machine or your Mac, if you move the front window aside, you immediately see what's behind it. But in those days, with so little memory and so little power, when you moved this window aside, it was just an empty white rectangle. And worse, it would flicker and slowly paint in with what was supposed to be there. And Atkinson was like, how did Xerox do this? It's like, it must be some genius. He spent weeks, and finally he came up with this elaborate plan of basically taking a screenshot of the covered up part and storing it off screen in a memory buffer, and then quickly anyway, very elaborate. And Jobs was like, my dude, you've done it. That's awesome. And so this is so true. So I spent a day with Bill Atkinson. It was his last interview, which is another reason I'm glad I did the book when I did. Since I did these 150 interviews, 4 of those guys have died or become unable to speak. So very lucky. So he called me and said, a few weeks after he had this breakthrough, he was at a nudist camp.
Such an Apple story.
Such an Apple story. He was sitting in a hot tub when this other dude gets in, and he said, "Hey, you're Bill Atkinson from Apple. I'm Bob Wilcox from Xerox." And he's like, "From Xerox?" And he goes, "Yeah, dude. I heard that you solved the overlapping Windows problem. You must be a frickin' genius." And Atkinson said, "I was recreating what I saw at your PARC thing." And the guy said, "No. We never solved it. Still haven't. You must be misremembering." Bill Atkinson only thought he saw that. And so he spent weeks solving a problem that he thought was solvable, but in fact wasn't until he did it.
And I like how you poke holes in the legend that Jobs walks into Xerox PARC, sees the graphical user interface, copies it, walks out with it. But it was so much more because he wanted everything simple, and the Atkinsons of the world wanted to simplify. Is there a world where Apple doesn't do Apple, and we maybe never, if not for decades, had the simple, easy to understand computers that we got used to pretty quickly?
I think so. I think it could have been a long time because Xerox was doing nothing with this technology. And even the simple thing of black text on a white screen, even that was considered super difficult to do and super advanced, and nobody was doing it. So anyway, so Apple put all this in the Lisa, revolutionary machine. It had all the things we know of in operating systems, like it wouldn't crash because it had memory protection, and you could run multiple windows at once, multiple programs at once, which other machines couldn't do. But it cost $10,000. So it failed. It completely bombed. And Jobs was like, but the ideas are so good, let's take that, put it in a little machine for 1/10 the price. It would have only 1/4 of the memory, so it couldn't do that stuff like memory protection and multiple programs at once, which turned out to be a real problem with the Macintosh. It didn't sell for the first couple of years. It was kind of a disaster. They were piling up in the factory in Fremont. Nobody would touch them. And partly because by the time they were done with it, it didn't cost $1,000. It cost $2,500, which, in today's money, that's like $8,000. Like, would you pay that for a computer with so little power? The longest document you can type is 10 pages long. Like, that was the Macintosh.
Yeah, it is impressive to talk to even the generation before us, like our parents, and how long they waited for anything.
Yeah.
And maybe they had to put a phone on the whatever, not to mention the AOL sound that we, that we remember. Obviously, Jobs and Woz get a lot of well-deserved time. One thing that really impressed me about reading your book was those 150 other people. You really bring out the Apple staff, the people who made a lot of this happen. And I'm curious how you made that happen. I mean, are Apple employees from 40 years ago in your Rolodex? How do you track these people down?
This was the thing. So you can find the old guys. They're around, and they really wanted to be interviewed. During these interviews, I don't know how I can express this. There was almost a sadness or a desperation or this burning thing of like, I want to be in the record and I want the record right. There have been a million Apple books. Unfortunately, they are just filled with errors. They are these authors have played a game of like author telephone. Like somebody will write a story that wasn't right in the first place, and then the next guy who writes a book refers to the first one, and on and on and on. So many stories. This is a great story about Steve Jobs and the iPod. He wanted it to be as small as it could be, and so they bring him the final prototype, and like, this is it, Steve. It can't get smaller, and he throws it in the fish tank, and air bubbles come up, and he goes, "See the air bubbles? That means there's more room in there. Get rid of it." What a great story.
You're saying that didn't happen?
Totally untrue. So finding the ex-Apple employees was no problem. The tough thing was current Apple employees. People who don't quit immediately stay at Apple a really long time. I mean, decades. And Apple's policy is current employees do not speak to journalists. So unless it's a special thing, like they want to explain their artificial intelligence thing to the Wall Street Journal that they line up. So I was looking at like 200 blank pages at the back of the book. So I approached them and said, I'm doing this book. It's going to come out at the 50th anniversary. Would you make an exception? And long story short, it took many months, and I harangued them for a long time. I sent them a sample chapter to show what the tone. A lot of books, most of the books were written by business journalists. So great business books, but that really wasn't my goal. I was less interested in for God's sake. I was less interested in, the illegitimate daughter and the stock scandals. And I wanted to know about the products and the technologies and the origin stories. And so I think that appealed to Apple. But anyway, bottom line is they finally said, okay, you can interview whoever you want. So I came out to Apple Park 4 times for entire days of 1-hour interviews, including every single person on the executive team and all these amazing engineers and designers. It was just a gift from God. It was just so lucky.
It really is the heart of the book, because Jobs comes and goes, Woz comes and goes.
Yeah.
Other CEOs, we'll get to that in a minute, come and go. But those employees, like you say, stayed for a long time. It was fascinating to read about their successes, but also their exasperation. And as someone who gets that stonewall from Apple and has for a long time, I was fascinated that they would tell you what that was like and the ups and downs. And so Jobs leaves, speaking of exasperation, to start his own thing. Meanwhile, new people take over. Apple has some highs, some lows even there. I'm curious, in your mind, David, Scully, Spindler, Emilio.
Nice.
Thanks. Do they get short shrifted because they're not Steve Jobs?
For sure. There is nobody you could plug into the Apple at that time in that role and have them be Steve Jobs. Even Tim Cook isn't Steve Jobs. Tim Cook is the opposite of Steve Jobs. Right. These poor guys, they are so slammed by history, all 3 of them. These three CEOs in 5 years. And, they made a ton of mistakes. Scully understood the culture, but he helped define the culture. He was there for 10 years. The other 2 guys really did not do well. And there were 11 years when Steve Jobs was gone from Apple. He bought Pixar, named it. He started this new computer company called Next that was going to sell these cool cubes, computers. They were black cubes, 1 foot on a side. He's going to sell them into the academic market. And during these 11 years, Apple slowly declined. And without a Steve Jobs at the helm, who really had leadership skills, it devolved into fiefdoms and duplication and redundancy and backstabbing. By 1996, they had 50 Mac models. The Performa 6115 CD. I had that one. No one could tell these computers apart, not even the salespeople. They had 12 different ad agencies with competing messages, some conflicting. They had my favorite story is there was one point during this time when 2 Apple lawyers showed up in trademark court to sue each other. I mean, it was just a smoking wreck of a company. And they were losing money. Macs were not good quality. They were kept aloft by the fans, by the faithful Apple.
Still a small percentage at the time.
Yeah, that's right. Apple's market share, as you may remember, Apple said, we have only 5% market share, but we're trying harder. No, they had 2% market share. They were lying. And it was the end. And they tried to sell Apple and nobody would buy Apple. Can you imagine? I mean, bargain basement prices. They tried to merge with, of all people, IBM. They tried to make Mac clones, which is a disaster. And, this era is usually skipped over in this story of Apple because it's not a success story. In fact, my editor kind of wished that I had to, but I find it fascinating. I mean, it's like why you slow down and look at a car wreck on the highway.
It's been our soap opera for 5 decades.
Yeah, that's right.
What do we like in a soap opera? Not just the wins. We like the valleys.
That's right. And you've been doing this job for 31 years, so you were there. You remember this.
I remember the power computers and all that. I also remember being at the press conference where Emilio brought Jobs back on as an advisor. And I'll contrast that with a later press conference later. But the crowd, and this was for one of the Apple events, was a little bit like, is this good? We remember him.
I was in the room with you.
Yeah.
So after 11 years, the last of these CEOs, Emilio, bought Next, the Jobs company. At the time, they'd gone out of business with the Cube computers, but they had this incredible operating system they'd written for it. It was modern, it was fast, it was so solid. It had memory protection and crash protection, all these things. And Apple was still trundling along with this ancient Mac operating system that crashed all the time, one program at a time. And they desperately, so for $425 million, they bought Next, and they got 300 engineers. They got this golden jewel of an operating system, and they got Steve Jobs. And so to announce this, it was this keynote speech where Gil Amelio was going to make a little speech and then bring on Jobs, and as a surprise, bring Woz back. Woz had been out of the company since 1985. And so I read the audiobook for this book myself. It's 23 and a half hours long. But wow, is it a juicy 23 and a half hours. But one cool thing, I was reassured that Barbara Streisand's book is 48 hours long. So
wow.
But one thing you can do in an audiobook is you can use the actual audio from events like this speech. And Emilio came out, and nobody knows what really happened. Some people thought he had a stroke. His argument was that the teleprompter was messed up, but he rambled. It was crazy. And you hear it in this audiobook, or you can watch it on YouTube. And it went on for 3 hours.
So you really only had to read 18 hours. Or whatever, yeah.
So, and Jobs is backstage going, what the hell is happening? And oh my God, I talked to the producer of that show, and his name is Sachiv Chahil, and he's Indian, and he's like, I wanted the earth to open up and swallow me. It's just like, it was just a smoking hilarious disaster. And Jobs came on finally, and he was so angry, and you could tell he was so angry. But he gave a killer speech, and within a year, he fired the entire board. He cut down those 50 Mac products down to 4. 2 laptops, 2 desktops, that's it. He canceled all the ad campaigns but one, and that was the Think Different ad, like, here's to the crazy ones. That was the one ad. He totally revamped the retail strategy. He repriced all the stock options so people would keep quitting. In a year, Steve Jobs never finished college, never went to business school, had no business running a big company. He pulled off, love Apple or hate it, the greatest turnaround in business history in a year.
He was also running Pixar at the time.
He was running Pixar at the time, that's right. And like a year later, Apple went from 6 weeks from bankruptcy to a $45 million profit. He introduced the iMac, which became, like, the thing about Jobs is, he has his issues, right? Especially in the younger years. He was very abusive to people. He would just rip you apart if he didn't like what you were doing or if he thought you could do better. He was petulant. He was a tyrant. But one thing this guy had was the ability to see the future. And you must have seen this over and over in this book, and it boggles my mind every single time. So this iMac, right? Here's Apple, this dying company. And what turnaround product do they come out? A weird, bulbous, plastic, blue, transparent, rounded pyramid with no floppy drive, no printer drive, no printer port, no keyboard port. Like, what are you doing? You don't change all the variables at once. And he did, and he knew that it would be great. It instantly became the best-selling computer in the history of the world. I mean, he sold hundreds of thousands in a matter of months.
And speaking of ads, it came in colors.
It did, well, yeah, it came in blue at first, and then within 9 months, they were offering colors, yeah.
Another moment during an Apple press conference, because during the I run, and we'll talk about a heater, Jobs is up there, and he says, one more thing. You'll remember this, and he was the interim CEO for a long time, the iCEO.
Yeah.
And he had a big graphic behind him on the screen that said iCEO, and that disappeared. And I mean, I've been to football games where the winning touchdown isn't cheered. There were cheers, there were tears.
Yep.
A standing ovation, the crowd, and
it was 5 minutes
amazing.
long. Can you imagine cheering continuously for five? Like a Broadway show gets a minute. But 5 minutes where he couldn't even speak, the crowd was cheering so much.
For something that was pretty much a done deal. I mean, he was running the company.
Yes.
Just took away that little I.
Yeah.
And so you mentioned the iMac. I mean, the run that iMac, iPod, iTunes, iPad, iPhone, and then iPad. And each of those weren't necessarily the first of their kind, of course, but famously changed the world nonetheless. How does that happen?
Yeah. In fact, the Apple haters always go, Apple doesn't invent anything. Like, yes, correct. They don't. The number of things that Apple has introduced that we take for granted, the mouse, laser printing, Wi-Fi, yes, Apple, the digital camera, Apple, a long list of things that Apple introduced, but it didn't invent them. So what Jobs had was this, in addition to being able to see the future, he had this incredible eye for spotting fledgling technologies in the wild that showed promise but weren't going anywhere because they were complicated and technical, and making them beautiful and fun to use. Over and over and over, he did that, and it worked every time.
And it's interesting because he would say things like, all right, the iMac is going to be different with the technology, and people were shocked, and then it was a big seller. And it was similar with each thing. He wanted it smaller. He wanted it to do different things. He wanted the antenna in a different place. Was there a time when things turned and everyone just said, okay, we'll follow this, or was everything a battle with him?
Oh, you mean his lieutenants?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, there were many times when they were all against him. I mean, Jobs was not perfect. There were times when he made big mistakes. One of them was with the iPod. The iPod, which we now know would go on to sell 700 million music players. The first year it didn't sell. And that is because it was an accessory for the Macintosh. They sold it only for the Mac. And all of Jobs' executive team were like, no, dude, open this up to Windows. We have 2% market share. What are you doing? And Jobs hated Microsoft so much for stealing the graphic interface ideas that Apple had hammered out for 3 years. He said, like, over my dead body. So a year goes by, the iPod is trickling along, when finally they're like, just do it as an experiment, Steve. Just do it. So they made a version of iTunes for Windows, which was like, and immediately the iPod took off and became this incredible seller. And I have to tell you, here's another example of Jobs being his most gifted. They decided they were going to do a new model every single Christmas. Like every year, a new one. So they really hit the gold mine with the iPod Mini. And this thing was the first time Apple had ever sold hundreds of millions of something. And it was just accelerating in sales. It was beautiful. It was small. It held so many songs. And Jobs canceled it at the peak of its ascendance. And he's like, we're going to cancel it, and we're going to replace this with the iPod Nano, which is smaller, but it also doesn't hold as many songs. you're going to kill the best-selling electronic project in history and replace it with something that holds less? Steve, no, what are you doing? He said, take all the money from the advertising, change all the factories, buy all the parts. We're going all in on this Nano. And they all thought he was crazy. And they did, and it made the Mini look like a warm-up act. It sold insane. He was right.
And yet I was thinking, I still see those strapped to arms at the gym or jogging.
Yep.
I mean, truly portable.
Yep.
You can connect it to your body. It was kind of like one of the early wearables. People love their older Apple products. I mean, they sell for a fortune on eBay. They love to bring it out and say, look, I've got one of those funky laptops that look like a clam.
Yeah, the toilet seat.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
And there's something about that loyalty to even the old thing instead of just the new thing.
What's cool is iPods are making a comeback because of the school systems that ban phones. So how are you supposed to listen to your music? You get an iPod off of eBay.
That's right. And they had photos. Some of them even made calls.
Yeah.
That's right. Various iterations. Okay, so the ubiquity of it all. And I was going to ask about this because we now use our iPhones, and we can get into how that came about. Not to mention all the devices that we have, and we're addicted to them. There is actually a court case going on right now, I'm sure you know, where companies based here in Silicon Valley are hauled into court for making their social media products addictive, literally addictive. And how do we get our social media so often on our iPhones? So this delivery system, whether it's for Wi-Fi or music, famously photos, talking to loved ones, FaceTiming with loved ones, all the great things, is sitting in court saying we are addicting young people and in a very bad way. Can we have too much technology too easily?
I mean, the big problem, I think, is the screen. So our faces are down, we're scrolling, the dopamine hits, the whole thing. And as you probably know from your reporting, right now, the big movement in Silicon Valley, including Apple, is devices without screens. So smart glasses, making a huge rush. Apple has incredible plans for the AirPods. So it's in your ear all the time. Like the movie Her. Did anyone see this? I'm sure it's a movie about an AirPod-like device in the near future that everybody has. And you talk to your Siri, who is played by Scarlett Johansson. And the plot is this guy falls in love with his Siri woman.
Right. His AI.
His AI, that's right. And in this near future, like, what do you do if you need a map? What do you do if you need a photo? So they also have this little accessory screen in their pocket. And when you need it, you can, oh, that's what it looks like. And then you put it away. So people are, Johnny Ive is said to be working on pendants or earpieces or glasses. So all the efforts right now are screenless devices. And that would take a lot of the sting out of what smartphones have done.
Where do you come down on the argument because to me it seems like two separate arguments. One, a school saying we want to ban iPhones because they distract from learning, but also the idea that because of this perhaps addiction, we need to penalize these companies if people say they've been bullied or even worse. Can we have one without the other? I'm not sure.
I mean, there are so many times in life where it's like, do we blame the gun maker or do we blame the shooter? And I'm not the one to decide, but I mean, it was like the law that Congress passed that said the social media site is not responsible for the awful stuff that people post.
Section 230.
There you go.
Right.
I was trying to simplify it for the audience. But yeah, so it's an age-old question. We've never found the definitive answer.
Let's talk about the iPhone because that is yet another life-changing thing, and not necessarily 100% for good. We got that out of the way, but the amazing way it brought in, among other things, the App Store. I mean, has there ever been a single product that created not just an industry for itself, and I'm sure there are many of those, but that created literally thousands of companies and entire industries?
I know, Uber, Tinder, DoorDash, Airbnb, social media, all of them came from the App Store idea. Yeah.
Right. And so I remember that one too, where John Doerr or whoever it was came out and said, I've got $100 million for the App Store. And I remember thinking, whoa, we were just excited about a phone, but now we're going to get whatever, I can't figure that out because that's why I don't get $100 million, but we're going to get whatever this spawns. And you're right, we got social media, we got Twitter, we got dating sites, we got shopping. I mean, that seems to me to be the most life-changing thing.
And the incredible thing is, this was another case, maybe the other case, when Steve Jobs was wrong. He was a guy who liked closed systems, right? From the beginning. The only fight he ever had with Steve Wozniak about the Apple II was about whether to include slots that you could put a card into and add a modem or a printer. Woz wanted 8 slots. He foresaw a day when it could be a musical instrument interface or a scientific instrument for researchers. Like, you could turn it into whatever you want. And Jobs was like, no, I hate this idea. People will come up with garbage. They'll ruin what we've done. And Woz, for the only known time that I know of, put his foot down. And he said, if you don't want slots, go get yourself another partner. So the Apple II had 8 slots, and that was responsible in large part for its incredible success. So the Macintosh was super closed. You could not upgrade the memory. You couldn't even open the screws because he designed it to require a special technician screwdriver. And the iPhone was the same thing. Everyone said, you got to make it so people can write their own apps. And he said, no way. We're going to give them everything they need. We're going to give them 16 apps, and people will be happy. And so for the first year, the iPhone did not sell that well.
Right.
And people started hacking the iPhone, jailbreaking it, so that they could write apps. I mean, can you imagine? No games, no banking. I mean, just nothing but the 16 apps Apple gave you. And eventually, people started writing really cool illegal apps. And I interviewed Scott Forstall, who's the iPhone software guy, and he said Jobs was reading a magazine article about some of these amazing apps that people had written and had to install illegally. And he's like, well, that's pretty cool. And he said, I've never seen this written up before anywhere. He said to Forstall, all right, here's what we're going to do. You and I are going to sit here for a week, and we're going to write down the ideas for every app there could ever be. And we're going to write them. Apple is going to write every conceivable app. And that's how we're going to solve this. And so behind Jobs' back, Forstall said to his team, okay, guys, build an app store. And so by the time Jobs finally came around and realized they were not going to write every conceivable app, Forstall said, guess what, Steve? I have this app store idea ready to go. And Jobs is like, you son of a turn it on. And so a year later, they launched the App Store, and that's what changed everything.
Because that to me feels like another what if. What if that didn't happen?
Yeah.
And the entire world of apps that we use for literally everything in our daily lives was just not there.
Yeah. This close.
And I believe in your book you talk about how the iPhone was supposed to be the iPad first.
Yeah,
okay.
The iPad came first. Yeah, I love this story. So one thing I learned, Apple is full of skunk works. It's full of little teams working on cool little things that never see the light of day. There are more Apple products that you've never heard of than you have. They all get killed at the last minute for one reason or another, economic or political or whatever. And one of these teams in Johnny Ive's design department was experimenting with new ways to operate your Mac. And so they bought this touchpad. It was for carpal tunnel people. So it let you type. It was a flat pad, but it had a keyboard keys etched in it. And so you could just type by barely touching like this. And the whole thing could also double as a trackpad. So you could also move the cursor by moving your finger, and it was multi-touch. So you could put your fingertips and turn like you're opening a jar, and that meant open something. So Apple bought one of these, and they were saying, could this interface with the Mac somehow? And they wound up ordering from this company one bigger, the size of a laptop screen, and they took a projector and shone it down onto a piece of paper that they taped over this and projected the Mac desktop. And so with their fingers, they could move icons. They could do this with pictures or maps. All the things we now know from the iPhone and the iPad, they were doing on this Mac interface. And this is my crowning achievement. I got a picture of that 2004 projector rig from the guy at Apple who built it. It's in the book. By the way, I'm not here to sell books, but the book
I'll do it for you. This is fascinating stuff. And yeah.
The book is printed in color, 360 pictures in color, as the publisher made explicitly clear, that's really expensive. So it was kind of a fight. Anyway, so years go by, and what happened was people were starting to put music playback into their flip phones. That was becoming a thing.
Right.
And Jobs is like, this is going to kill our iPod business unless we do it better. So it was Steve Jobs who killed his own iPod industry by saying we're going to put it in a phone so people have only one thing to carry around instead of two. So the initial idea was we'll take the iPod and we'll add cellular circuitry to that, like with the spinning dial and everything. So the problem was, how do you enter text? So there were all these experiments with like the whole alphabet displayed, and you'd spin the dial to reach the T and then click the dot, and that would be... Yeah, no. Everyone was like, this will never work. And then there was this idea, what about that thing we had 3 years ago or 2 years ago with the projector and the multi-touch? Could you make that work on a tablet? And so Johnny and I have made 20 different prototypes, but then as this phone urgency mounted, Jobs is like, shelve the tablet, see if you can do all that on a phone. And it finally came down to a showdown between the iPod team with their cellular iPod and this multi-touch team with their multi-touch phone, which was much harder to do, really hard to do. And they were going to run it on Mac OS X, like this huge Unix industrial operating system in a phone. But finally, that's the one that won, and they did it in an incredibly short amount of time, and it was miraculous. Remember the first time you did this to a photo?
Yeah.
It was incredible. Or spun a list like this. I mean,
And yet, at the same time, you mentioned that it didn't sell all that well. I remember what was it, 3G or whatever technology?
That was the
super
one.
Slow. And it's one thing, we're privileged to be able to be among the first to take these things out in the wild, to test them. And I love to take them to coffee shops or the gym or whatever. And this was, at first, the iPhone was looked at as, you got one of those? Like, you're the biggest nerd in the world. And that, by the way, doesn't work as fast as my Razr flip phone or Nokia or whatever.
That's right.
At the same time, somebody knew something because, Motorola, Nokia, Research in Motion, BlackBerry stock,
All gone.
Yeah. And so clearly it was eventually meant to be faster, and the app store of it all and all that.
Yeah.
So I want to make sure we have enough time to get to questions and to get to a couple other big things in the book. I mean, Steve Jobs, it was hard to watch him on stage towards the end being very gaunt.
Yeah.
I don't know why that I had such a visceral reaction to that and to his eventual death. This was someone I covered, not a family member, but it was someone who was so clearly important to the Bay Area, to our ecosystem, to technology. And I remember the night he died, I didn't know what to do. I drove up to Apple headquarters, and sure enough, it was a vigil.
Yeah.
I mean, employees were out there hugging, lighting candles, lighting their iPhones, which you saw.
Yeah.
I mean, it was this incredibly emotional reaction. You must remember this.
Oh, vividly. I mean, it was like this giant light had gone out, and they had done one of these mega iProducts roughly every 3 years, and every one changed us, and every one was a mega hit. And like, what's the world going to do without him?
Right. Which brings us to Tim Cook.
Yeah.
And I don't know, $3.5 trillion later, we know what the world did. They continued to buy these Apple products. I believe it was the 4S that was the last one under the...
Yeah.
We're up to 17 now.
Yeah.
And so that's a lot of years and a lot of phones and a lot of Macs, a lot of laptops. I mean, I mentioned the other CEOs. Tim Cook deserves and gets in your book a different treatment than those guys.
Yeah. I mean, Tim Cook, since 2011, has quadrupled Apple's stock price, revenue, profits, and tripled the headcount of Apple.
And yet,
I mean, what's that?
And yet,
yeah. And yet, it's people criticize him because that 3-year cycle of mind-blowing new revolutionary products, that's over, and I don't really know, is it for sure just because nobody's Steve Jobs? Or there's another theory. Steve Jobs came along and his second realm at Apple in this incredible inflection point in humanity. One is China, electronics, tiny miniaturization. So all of these things made possible things like the iPod and the iPhone. And also, culturally, we were now, this is when he came back in 1996, 1997, we were now over our fear of technology in large part. And we were more accepting of these revolutionary new products. So there is a parallel universe where Steve Jobs lived and even he couldn't have kept up that pace, that he plucked the low-hanging fruit. And I mean, the proof is that nobody else has ever come up with anything iPhone level either. No Google, Samsung, Sony, no one else has come up with an entirely new, form factor like Jobs did either. And so maybe that was a once in 1,000-year event.
It's interesting because Tim Cook is called a manager. He's sort of like the quarterback that moves the ball but isn't flashy.
Yeah.
And yet, we've had so many iPhones that have done so many amazing things. The App Store has flourished. The actual products have done really well. I'll throw the watch in there. And things that have, you're right, they didn't move the needle as much, but we're still loving them / dependent on them, perhaps even more than we were when Steve Jobs was still alive.
So the Tim Cook story, so they've had two successes. They've had the watch and the AirPods.
Right.
Those are both Tim. But those, if you think about it, those are both iPhone accessories, right? It's nothing on the scale of the iPhone. They've tried twice to do a Steve Jobs-esque new platform. There was the Vision Pro goggles, which I don't know how many of you tried them, but truly technical brilliance, 5,000 patents, like incredible, but just heavy, uncomfortable, way too expensive, and no really compelling thing to do with them, which is arguably a bad thing in a product. And then they spent $1 billion a year for 10 years on the car, the Apple car. It was going to be this beautiful, electric, completely self-driving, no steering wheel electric car, and they hired 1,200 engineers from Tesla and BMW and all these other car companies. And during the 10 years, they canceled it in 2024. During the 10 years, profit margins on cars went down, and electric cars sales were leveling off. So they finally gave that up. But here's what I'm proud of in the book. There is something Apple has done that's crept up on us that I think is truly revolutionary. Apple has become a medical company. This watch on your wrist can warn you of diseases of your brain, of your heart, of your lungs, of your blood. How does it do that? It's this incredible AI-based sort of triangulation of the few signals it can get from your wrist and correlate that with things happening in your body. So it's really hard to get FDA approval for these things. I mean, it takes years for it to detect your heart diseases. Apple had to do a study with Stanford involving 400,000 people, and they showed the FDA and said, see, it's accurate, and they finally proved it. But so the first one was atrial fibrillation. It's the most common heart rhythm disease. In 35% of people, it gives you a stroke, which is really bad. It's where your heart just quivers instead of pumping. And the problem is it's intermittent. So you can go to a doctor's office and they'll give you a test and I don't see anything wrong. What you need is something measuring all the time. Well, guess what? That's what the watch is. I mean, I knew this guy when I lived in Connecticut, 35-year-old, big tennis player. He's an athlete. And his watch goes, you seem to have something weird going on with your heart rhythm. You should see a doctor. He went and he's like, dude, you have atrial fibrillation, and this could have said a stroke and killed you. And so you can take medicine for it if you know. So Apple, they get hundreds of letters a month from people who got that notification and their lives are saved. Now they've got hypertension, high blood pressure. They predict that they will get 1 million people aware of their high blood pressure a year just from that notification. Sleep apnea, this thing where that thing, really bad for you, can lead to heart issues. Now it tells you about that. I have reason to believe they're working on snoring detection why not? It's got a microphone and a vibrator. So if you can turn it on and if it hears you sleeping, it'll nudge you into a lighter realm of sleep. They've just put a heart rate monitor in the AirPods. These tiny little things are now detecting your pulse.
And they can work as hearing aids, I understand.
And they now are, yes, that's a great example. Oh my God, the average price for hearing aids until the AirPods, the average price was $4,600. 80% of Americans who needed them couldn't afford it and didn't get them. 80%. And when you can't hear, you get lonely, depression, early death. And so the FDA, the government passed a new rule that you no longer have to be an audiologist to prescribe hearing aids as long as you prove that it's safe and effective, blah, blah, blah. So Apple was one of the first. So they're working on glucose monitoring. Can you imagine the lives changed for diabetics instead of having to stick themselves multiple times a day to measure their insulin? So Apple is quietly, I was told by their medical director that no new product is conceived without the medical team at the table.
It's kind of the definition of wearables and where they should be going, and I'm so glad to see that. So we're going to get to the audience questions, but 1 minute. So I'll ask the unfair question, which is to crystal ball something. So 50 years from now, the 90-year-old David Pogue, am I right? The lead paragraph of your book, Apple, the last 50 years. Any guesses?
I mean, nobody knows. Not even Apple knows. But we know that they're working on smart glasses. We know that the medical stuff is going to be big. Eddie Q, who's the head of services, said that in 10 years, we will no longer be a phone-centric company or a phone-centric society. We'll move beyond that, either with the earpieces or the glasses. People ask about brain implants. I mean, really? Like, oh, the new, iBrain 15.0, I'm going in for surgery again. Like, I just don't see that.
Right.
Like, how do you take it in for service?
Earlier today, I was wearing the new Meta Ray-Bans to test those.
Yeah.
I just don't know if we want AI and that kind of thing in our glasses. I felt creepy wearing them.
Yeah.
Not because they were glasses, but because I could have been filming
You
something.
were creepy wearing them.
Yeah, well, yeah. All right, let's get to some of your questions, and thank you for doing these. So, David, these are questions from the audience. Did you learn anything about accessibility at Apple? Famously, this company does this. Yes.
Yes.
Talk about that.
Oh my gosh, this is one of my favorite topics. So the last chapter in the book is called Through Lines. These are things that have been true of Apple all the way through all 50 years. Some of them you know about: dedication to excellence and secrecy, closed systems. But one of them is accessibility. Do you know Steve Jobs founded Apple's accessibility office in 1985? The year after the Macintosh. Now, it was one guy, but he famously brought in all the engineers, and he gave them a pencil, and he said, turn on the Mac and type something with all you've got is a pencil. And they couldn't even turn it on. It had a rocker switch on the back. You couldn't turn it on, couldn't insert a floppy, so many things you couldn't do. So the Mac engineers went back on the spot and invented all these cool accessibility features, like instead of a beep, if there's an error, it would flash the screen. So if you can't hear, they invented sticky keys on that spot, which is you hold down the numeric keypad keys and they act as directional arrows. Like upper left, you hold down the 7 key and the cursor moves if you have motor control problems. So yeah, Apple's accessibility stuff is absolutely insane. They also do not conceive of a product without the accessibility team at the table. And there are some unbelievable ones that you can use every day. You know about the back tap? You can set it up so that tapping 3 times on the back of the phone does your choice of whatever. And for me, it's the flashlight. So I just go tap, 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 and the flashlight's on. And all of these are accessibility features that you should check out because they're useful to everybody.
Here's a question that you could answer and that I think the head of Disney would probably shudder over. What do you think Apple would be like if Steve Jobs were still alive and running it?
Wow. It's really hard to imagine because, as I mentioned, could he have kept up that pace of innovation? He was an idea factory, so it's likely he could have come up with whole new ideas. But like, how would he deal with the political climate and the tariffs and like politically, we don't even know where Jobs stood. He seemed, liberal in many aspects, but then he was like rabidly anti-union. So like, it's really hard to peg him.
I do remember the press conference where and he was not known, at least by us reporters, for his sense of humor. He was known for, I can't believe this color's here, get this mic off me, whatever. We all have our stories of that. When he allowed Noah Wyle to come on stage, who played him in Pirates of Silicon Valley, or some movie, and jump around and talk about the insanely greatness of everything. And I thought, that's pretty impressive.
Oh, man, I'm going to argue with you about the sense of humor.
Okay.
There have been entire books about Steve Jobs that never indicated how hilarious this guy was. He was so freaking funny. So I got 15 minutes a year with him. After they would do a keynote, you get one-on-ones with him. And I mean, this is just a dumb thing, but he was really gone. He was dying. And I said, well, Steve, I hope you feel better. And he said, your doctor says all I got to do is eat more ice cream. I mean, it was a joke. But those keynotes were unbelievable. This is how they unveiled Wi-Fi, okay? I was there, I laughed. Well, actually, the Noah Wyle thing was incredible because it was the regular Macworld keynote. He looked so much like Steve Jobs then. He comes on in the black turtlenecks and the jeans, and he said, you couldn't tell that it wasn't him from the back. And he started out the same way. He took a sip of water, and he said, we've got a great show for you today. We're going to show you some, and he did the hands. Yeah. We're going to show you some really insanely great things, like crazy, insanely great things, like super crazy, insanely great things. He kept adding on these adjectives, and then slowly the audience is like, what is happening right now? And then Steve Jobs himself in the identical outfit comes barging on and goes, no, you're doing it all wrong. You don't go for the water bottle until the second minute,
That's true.
I mean, and then they unveil the iBook, the toilet-shaped laptop, and he had it on a stand like this. He said, there's one more thing, his famous line, and he had a cameraman look over his shoulder at the screen of the iBook, and he goes, look, I can surf the web on this thing. And he called up CNN, he called Disney, and all of us were going like, this is your one more thing? Like, we all surf the web. What are you doing? And he goes, and then if I want to go to apple.com, and he picks up the laptop and he's walking across the stage, the cameraman's still shooting, and suddenly the audience is getting it. It's like, there's no wires. What is happening? And you can hear people lose their mind. It's magic. So he stops in the middle of the stage and he's like, oh, you noticed? And then he takes a magician's hoop and he does this. I mean, hilarious. There's a whole chapter on these in the book because they're just... So they switch, when they finally bought Next, right, for the operating system, they turned the Next operating system into Mac OS X, it's like putting a different engine in your car. No existing Mac programs would run on Mac OS X. Every software company had to rewrite, including Office and Photoshop, and all the apps had to be rewritten to run on this new thing. So how does Apple persuade hundreds of software companies to rewrite their software for Apple customers' benefit? So at the developers conference in 2001, I guess it was, he comes out and he's very somber and he's very sad, and they project this huge stained glass church window in the background. There's a live organist playing Bach's Toccata and Fugue. The trapdoor opens on the stage, fog machine, up from underneath on an elevator comes a casket, a coffin, and Jobs walks sadly over to it, opens the lid, and everyone in the audience is like, what is happening? And he reaches in to pull out his occupant, which is a 4-foot-tall Mac OS 9 box. And he said it, and he said, we are gathered here today to mourn the death of Mac OS 9. It served us well, blah, blah. And he did a eulogy, and the whole point was to say, guys, we're not doing that anymore. Move your efforts into the new one, Mac OS X, because this is dead. And like, no one could forget the way he did that. So I consider that brilliant.
You're right, and that does come through in the book. He did have a sense of humor. And a side note on the Noah Wyle thing, not long after the Facebook movie came out, the social network, to start Facebook's annual developer conference, F8, Jesse Eisenberg came out.
Oh, did he?
And he's Jesse Eisenberg. It's hilarious. Zuckerberg, it didn't work quite as well. They didn't, anyway. Okay, during your research for this book, name something that shocked you, or at least surprised you.
Yeah, well, I would say two things. One was the number of companies Apple buys to get done what it does. I mean, all the time. Like in the last year, they're trying to fix their AI problems. They bought 7 AI companies. When they decided to start making their own chips, designing their own chips, which was another whole topic, they bought 6 chip companies. They do that all the time. You don't hear about them. Like Meta, Google, Microsoft, they all make big acquisitions. Like they buy WhatsApp or they buy Instagram, multi-billions of dollars. Apple makes small, targeted, quiet ones where they just want the engineers and the technology. So the degree to which that's going on, I found startling. And the other one was over and over and over, I heard these incredible stories of the extremes Apple goes to make things work. The Face ID story is my favorite one. They wanted to make sure that Face ID, the face recognition that unlocks your phone, would work on every face, everywhere, every time. So they would take this prototype to make sure your twin couldn't unlock it. They took it to twins conferences. They wanted to make sure that like no kind of creative facial hair could fool it. So they would take it to Harley Davidson rallies and try it on all these guys. You know, they were like, what the fuck? You know, and they took it for the first time in Apple history. They were allowed to take a prototype out of the continent, and they took it to deep sub-Saharan Africa to try it on like tribal faces, which had different bone structures. They wanted to make sure masks wouldn't interfere. They couldn't fool it. So they hired the top Hollywood effects guys to make a series of hyper lifelike human heads. I mean, with, you know, grizzled whiskers and eyebrows and the retina, the whole thing. And to test that, and like the woman in charge of sensors told me, like, she felt so bad for the guy in the mailroom who opened the box, like, oh my God! You know, like, there were all these like heads, you know.
And the oxygen packs to
Yes.
test the watch?
This is another one. So the watch tells you how many calories you're burning. How does it know? It's on your wrist. So they do have sensors on there that look for blood flow through your wrist. And how does it know, though, how much oxygen is dissolved in your blood, how many calories you're burning? So Apple became the world's largest purchaser of calorimeters. These are backpacks that you wear with a tube and a face mask that measures the carbon dioxide output and calculates how many calories you're burning. And then they set up these fake apartments, and they hired people to live in the apartments wearing these rigs while they work and do laundry and sleep and eat, so that they could correlate the real numbers with the numbers their algorithms were telling them from the watch to make sure that the numbers came out right. I mean, we're talking, they go so many miles beyond the Call of Duty.
I remember getting a reporter early watch and just trying to dazzle my friends. Look how many steps I'm taking. And then I read your anecdote and I thought, no, that's something. I was doing absolutely nothing. All right, I think we have time for one more. And this is a great question. Name another company that you would like to cover in the future and why. And I know you cover lots of them, but this in depth, I mean, what company would you love to just tear into?
I mean, honestly, the happy thing about this book is it's doing really well, and everybody's on social media posting selfies with the book. It's like really thrilling. The sad thing is I'll never be able to do this again. This is the end. I've been covering this company for 40 years. I was a Macworld magazine columnist for 13 years, and then I wrote this New York Times technology column for 13 years, and now CBS News. So this is the only company I know that well. I mean, I guess I could start from scratch, but like, is there any company in the world as interesting?
Would you read a book if it was on the shelf right now called Microsoft, the first 51 years?
I don't think so.
No?
That has a real ring to it, Scott.
How about Google about to turn 30?
I mean, SpaceX interests me a lot just because it's again, really unexpected, counterintuitive. It was known that you can't do that. It was known that you can't start a rocket company and have it succeed. And now they're the most successful rocket company in the world, like NASA's second place. So yeah, SpaceX maybe, but nobody would buy it like compared to this.
Right. Right. No, there's a special place in the Bay Area, and I'm guessing as you're in even other states or countries or wherever this book tour takes you, there will be a specialness to Apple that other companies just don't and maybe won't have.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of discussion about Apple's future right now because Tim Cook is 65. I don't know when he's going to retire, but it will be someday. And Apple is said to have missed the generative AI boat. They're behind on that stuff. That's another whole conversation. Apple does not generally release products that sort of work, right? Like ChatGPT just makes stuff up, like
right
20% of the time. Apple's not going to release something like that. So anyway, who knows? But I will say, Apple has right now, these are the actual numbers, 2.5 billion current customers. People carrying around Apple stuff right now. That is 31% of the global population. If they were a country, it would be bigger than China, bigger than India. It would be the biggest country in the world. To me, that gives Apple a big cushion for fumbling, like for making mistakes. Like, it's hard to switch, right? You've already bought the apps for this platform. You already learned to use their conventions. Really, you're going to start over with Android and Windows or whatever. So there's a lock-in, for these 2.5 billion people that makes them unlikely to change.
And I will say this in closing, I also got an early copy of David's book. I couldn't put it down. Even the slow times at Apple, it's our soap opera. This thing is fascinating. We are blessed to know that David will be out autographing copies of the book that you can buy and have him autograph. And really, my thanks to David Pogue tonight for taking the time.
Thank you so much, Scott.
Excellent job.
I do. Thank you. That was truly great, man. Thank you. I can tell you did when he said he couldn't put it down, that's something, because it weighs 3.2 pounds.
I'm in better shape for reading this book.
But I do have one more thing. I was not always a writer and a technology guy. I started out, first 10 years of my career, I was a Broadway conductor. So I was a pit musician, piano player. So I have this side habit where I write new lyrics to old songs about Apple. Would you like to hear one of those?
Yes.
You really think you had a choice? Yeah, let's do this for the live stream so you can hear it. All right, so Steve Jobs, as we know, came back to Apple in 1997, and I had just seen the movie Evita, with Madonna, and Jobs came out at the Macworld keynote like this, and people went crazy, and I'm like, where have I seen this before? So, this is a little volume. It won't be easy, you'll think I'm strange when I try to explain why I'm back after telling the press Apple's future is black. You won't believe me. All that you see is a kid in his teens who started out in a garage with only a buddy named Woz. You try rhyming with garage. Don't cry for me, Cupertino. The truth is I never left you. I know the ropes now. I know what the tricks are. I made a fortune over at Pixar. Don't cry for me, Cupertino. I've still got the drive and vision. I still wear sandals in any weather. It's just that these days they're Gucci leather. Thank you. I have one more for you, and this one plays a very special place in my heart because this is when the iPhone was about to come out for the first time. People had stood in line at the Apple stores for a week to be first in line. So I wrote this song literally on the train into New York City with the intention of making a video with the camcorder where I would get people in line to sing the various lines of this song while waiting for the iPhone. And I posted it to YouTube. Ladies and gentlemen, for 6 hours, this was the most watched video on YouTube. And Now the end is near. I'm sick to death of this old cell phone. Bad sound, the signal's weak, the signal sucks. A made in hell phone. I've heard there's something new, a million times more rad than my phone. I too will join the cult. I want an iPhone. Concerns, I have a few. It's got some flaws, we may just face it. No keys, no memory card, the battery's sealed, you can't replace it. But God, this thing is sweet, a multi-touch iPod Wi-Fi phone. You had me from hello, I want an iPhone. Oh no! Phone. Uh-oh. Nikki's like, those batteries are 5 years old, are you sure? I want to touch its precious screen. I want to wipe the smudges clean. I want my friends to look and drool. I want to say, look, now I'm cool. I'll stand in line and I'll get mine. I'll get an iPhone. God damn it. For what is a man? What has he got? If not iPhone, then he's got squats. It's all the things a phone should be. Who cares if it's AT&T? I took a stand, paid $500,000, and got an iPhone. Thank you.
David Koch, everybody. And now we know what those keynotes were missing.
Yeah.